This is from the website thewaythetruthandthelife.net.
This video is a quick overview of two murder cults that threaten civilization today. Also, why Russia is so demonized by the American political and press. Also, where this behavior comes from.
The original video about two murder cults was published in December of 2019. I had lost about 40 pounds. I had discovered early in 2019 that Mohammad, in studying his life, that he had learned the basis for his murder cult from Moses, that he had a very honorable life and was ended up, the details will be in the video, or already in the older version, and I'm just adding to it. He learned the Torah about Moses having this God up on the mountain that gave him the power, and Moses went so far, as is written in the Torah, to have his wife's whole nation exterminated. All the men, all the boys, even baby boys, all the women that were not virgins, but kept 32,000 virgins and spread them out. At any rate, Mohammad learned that by being a camel caravan worker, and the Jewish, they go along, the merchants with the caravans. And I've been traveling back and forth between Russia and America for the last almost 20 years, 4 times a year. And the Jewish on almost every plane, sometimes the father with a hood over him and his son, they're reciting the Torah. The young Jewish boys need to be able to recite the Torah. But in the airport, Jewish men waiting for a plane there and reciting the Torah. At any rate, they did this on the camel caravans, and that's how Moses learned about, or Muhammad learned about Moses, and that God gave him special privilege, and he could go and conquer people and take their goods and women. That actually, in the beginning of 2019 is when I discovered that. And it so shocked me that it devastated me. I think it harmed my immunity system, because by the time I made this video originally in December 2019, I had lost 40 pounds. And I went to the veterans doctor there in Florida, and they sent me on an ambulance up to St. Petersburg, Florida. And I was diagnosed with liver bile duct tumor. And I had come, that was in December. In February, beginning of February last year, they put a metal stent in that I would have my bile fluid going for digestion again. And I've actually gained back much of the weight. I was told that it's not curable, and I had about a year to live. That was over a year ago, so I'm not supposed to be here. But what's motivating me to go back and revise the December 2019 video and add to it was that Professor Peterson with his videos. An amazing man.
Now, Al Kolajczak, very intelligent, genius teacher, who said how to deal with presenting a message. His overview was, number one, tell them what you're going to tell them. Number two, tell them. And number three, tell them what you told them. So, step one, I'm going to tell you about Mohammad. I'll read you from a list of his accomplishments, a very honorable young man who accomplished many wonderful things. But as caravan leader, he learned the Torah. And where Moses saw this God on the mountain that gave him the power to be an authority and gave him the power to actually murder the whole tribe of his wife. And we'll get some details next. But where this behavior comes from and why can the American politics and press be controlled? It's a genetic thing. The anarchists, the women's liberationists, and the homosexual liberationists have a thing in common against the alpha male. And we'll talk about that, the genetic history of what makes babies, makes the genetics of the future. Okay, so that's the step one. I didn't put in step one. Let me put in why Russia is so demonized, because it has nuclear weapons and will defend Syria and Iran. Okay, let's go over it again. Mohammed was very honorable, and I'll read to you from a list of his the years and what his life. Muhammad was born in 570 years after Jesus. He was an honorable merchant from 13 years old with his uncle. His mother, his father died before he was born. His mother gave him up to be raised by another family. She died. He was then an orphan. His grandfather took over. His grandfather died. Then his uncle took over. His uncle was from one of the four major groups, Arab groups in Mecca. So he worked with his uncle to start with. At 25, Muhammad married Khadija, a wealthy widow, 40 years old. And they lived a monogamous life together, had 2 sons and 4 daughters. He was so honored when they were rebuilding the Kaaba, where that black stone that is worshipped is stored. When they were rebuilding that, when they went to put the stone back, Muhammad was so honored at 35 years old that they said he could put the stone back. And he was wise enough, and they said, no, take a sheet. And of the 4 strong Arab tribes there, let the leader of each take a corner and take the stone back. So he showed respect to others and gained respect for himself. The spiritual thing, Muhammad started at 37. Muhammad reported that he was visited by Gabriel in a cave. Appeared to him many times and told him he was a prophet of Allah. This background came from Muhammad learning the Torah verbally. The Jewish merchants that traveled with him at night over the desert as their encampment would recite the Torah. He learned the Torah. And he learned that Moses was up on a mountain. Now, please, let's look at Moses. Moses was...
I want to insert here that Pharaoh is recorded in Exodus chapter 1, verse 16, ordering the Jewish midwives to murder all the male babies born. And that's why Moses' mother put him in a basket in the river where the Pharaoh's daughter was washing her clothes.
It's discovered in the river by Pharaoh's daughter, and his mother had put him there because they were killing the children at the time. And Moses' mother offered to care for the baby for Pharaoh's daughter, and did until he was weaned. And so he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And when he was then about 20, he saw a Jewish man being abused by an Egyptian, and he murdered the Egyptian. And he thought nobody knew anything. He felt safe. But then he come back, and a couple of Jewish men talking to him, "You're going to murder us the way you murdered." And then he realized that the word had gotten out and he wasn't safe. So he escaped and went over into what's now southern Palestine or southern Israel. And at a well was some daughters of the high priest with the sheep going to the water hole, and there were some men that were abusing them, and he defended them and even helped get water out of the well for them, and that was reported to the high priest of the Midianites, and he gave Mohammad a job. Mohammad, 20 years old, got a job to watch his sheep, and then gave him one of his daughters for a wife. And Moses lived there until he was 60 years old. And the generation back in Egypt that were a threat to him had died, and he went back to Egypt at that time. And that's when he got involved and come out, and he after he had this magic god on a mountain give him the power. Read what he did in Numbers chapter 31. The Jewish men and the Midianite women were getting attracted. The Midianite women were attracting as they escaped from Egypt. And he used that as an excuse to murder everyone except the 23,000 virgins. They had left he took 1,000 from each tribe and sent them out to exterminate the Midianites. And the Israeli Jewish soldiers come back with the women and the children. And Moses was angry. Him and the high priest were angry. "We told you to exterminate them. Kill them all except the virgins." They killed the baby boys even. So that's the example that Mohammed learned, that if you're empowered by this God that meets you in private and gives you this power, you can exterminate even your wife's tribe and take all of their property, but keep the virgins. All right. Mohammed learned that. And then later he had these visions, and his wife supported him in being a religious leader. There were many religions there. The Kaaba had had many gods that they worshipped. They had that was a center for Arabic worship. At any rate, they also had the Arab tribe had 3 female goddesses. This is an abstract from the Holy Koran, Surah 53, published by Oxford University. At one point, Mohammed said they were daughters of Allah, and then he said no, that was Satan talking. But that was the basis of the 1988 book Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, which was condemned by Muslims, Shiite and Sunni. Here's a day in history note where the head of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, made a fatwa for the death of Salman Rushdie. He's had to pretty much stay out of public eye since, and lives in a guarded life. You can read about those things. But the Arab tribes turned on Muhammad. He had to leave. Many of his people went to Ethiopia, and that's where they learned from the infancy gospel of Thomas that Jesus made mud birds and they flew. That's in the Koran, by the way. Things from the Torah are there also, but Jesus and the mud birds is there. Jesus is in the Quran, not as the superior child of God, but as a prophet, but Muhammad greater prophet. And that's a whole other thing. So that's where that murder cult came from. The big difference between the Jewish murder cult and the Muslim murder cult is the Jewish murder cult is ethnic. You have to be Jewish. Your mother is supposed to be Jewish for you to become a Jew. Like the Ethiopians that came claiming Judaism as their religion and come to Israel. There's a documentation of Israel injecting them that they can't have babies. But that's just another issue. But the point is, for Islam, all you have to do is submit. Either you get your head cut off or you can submit to be essentially a slave, second-class citizen, and pay tribute to them. So these 2 murder cults, and don't get me wrong, there are many good people. I've had Jewish friends and I've had Muslim friends that weren't taken by the childhood indoctrination, blah, 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 blah. And I'm rejected by many of my Christian friends because I'm exposing the truth and I was brought up to believe everything is the word of God. You've got to submit or you're going to hell and you're going to burn. Or everything is the word of God, and if you submit and do what he wants, he'll serve you, and you can have your mate and your cars and your money and your sex and your children, whatever you want. It'll be given to you, but you got to submit to this God and his priesthood. Okay. Where do we go from here? This has morphed into Israel reclaiming the prophecy that they're going to have all this property from the Nile to the Euphrates. And they've been stealing and murdering ever since the Zionists, which many Orthodox Jews resent. the Jews and Christians were living peacefully among the Muslims throughout the Middle East. And then they set up this Zionist plot to kill and take land for the Jewish people. And the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, become enemies of Islam. And look at what's happened to them. And that's why the Jewish worked fine with the Muslims in ruling Spain for 700 years. It was a time of glory for the Jewish. And the Jews did fine helping the German lords to rule over the underlings and keep their books and get their hands dirty with medicine and the sickness, dealing with that. They were literate, and the sons all had to learn to read and write and memorize the Torah, or you know about that. All right, that's the foundation of it, this reestablishment of a murder cult called Zionism, and the insult to any human rights, whether you're Muslim. There are many honorable things about Islam and respecting another person on their rights and so forth. And it was being practiced before Zionism come and destroyed the peace of the Middle East. So that's the basic truth. Read chapter 31 of Numbers, and you'll see where the murder cult example was given to Mohammed. And look at how Moses, the model, went and exterminated his wife's people to get control and power over an area and their material goods. What's it say for today? Today, Israel is using America and all the propaganda against Russia because Russia has nuclear weapons. Iran has a problem with in Pakistan. The Sunni Muslims have blown up more than 100 Shiite mosques. So the Sunnis were brought there by the wealthy Arabs in the confrontation with the breakup of India, that they wanted India to be a Muslim state, and all of the madrasas that they put in and indoctrination for strict Saudi Islam, and made Shiites the enemies, and Hindus, and all the murder that brought.
The following clip will give you a little insight into the Israeli manipulation and control of American support.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. This month marks the 48th anniversary of the Israeli attack on the U.S. Navy spy ship, the USS Liberty. The attack took place during the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. The official story of the attack was that it was a case of mistaken identity. What we know is that the spy ship was attacked by 4 Israeli fighter bombers, Navy motor torpedo boats, near Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. It's officially said the attack was an error, that the U.S. ship in question was thought to be an Egyptian ship. But many, including former heads of the CIA and NSA, never believed the Israeli version of the events. Surviving witnesses of the attack confirm that this could not have been a mistake. They say that day in June 1967 was clear that the American flag was very visible on the ship. But as we know from a report that Pulitzer Prize winner John Crutzen wrote in the Baltimore Sun and the Chicago Tribune in 2007, there weren't meant to be any survivors. Crutzen quotes Steve Forsland, who worked as an intelligence analyst for the Air Force. The ground control station, meaning Israeli, ordered the aircraft to attack and sink the target and ensure they left no survivors. Today we'll speak to one of those survivors. Sergeant Bryce Lockwood joins us from Stratford, Missouri. He served 13 years in the Marine Corps as a staff sergeant and remains the only surviving Marine of the attack on the Liberty. As a Marine, he received the Silver Star for heroism. Also joining us from Arlington, Virginia is Ray McGovern. Ray is a former CIA analyst who was employed under 7 U.S. presidents for 27 years. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Bryce, I want to kind of jump to the end, and then we'll work our way chronologically. If this communication that Crutzen quotes, that the mission was actually to sink the boat, and so that I want to assume so there wouldn't be any witnesses to the attack, why didn't they sink it?
Well, I think they ran out of ammunition. I know the aircraft ran out of ammunition. And the motor torpedo boats, there were 3 of them. The standard formation is a wedge formation, 1 in the center and 2 held back a little bit. The forward one fires 2 torpedoes and swings off. The next one fires 2 torpedoes and swings off. And the third one likewise. So there should have been 6 torpedoes fired. There were 5 that were fired. Only 1 actually struck the ship. But it struck the ship in the vital area where all of our communications personnel, intelligence personnel were working. As a matter of fact, I have a picture right here. This was taken of me the next morning.
So, still, you would think, would the planes not be able to keep bombing and sink the ship?
There were only so many rockets and so many 40 millimeter cannon shells that they could fire at us. There were over 820 large caliber strikes on the ship, including napalm. There were 2 napalm bombs dropped onto us, rockets, and 40 millimeter cannon fire, which makes a pretty big hole. The ship, when those rockets struck it, it was literally like a very hot knife through butter. Just melted 3/4-inch steel on the skin of the ship.
Now, if I understand correctly, from what I know of the story, there was some kind of blocking of SOS messages, but finally an SOS message does get through, or there's evidence that one did get through earlier and wasn't responded to, and we're going to get to that part of the story. But then an SOS message does go through, and then the Israelis break off their attack. Is that correct?
The Israelis were jamming our distress frequencies, and that's a violation of international law. It's okay to jam tactical frequencies, normally where orders are sent back and forth between ships and personnel and aircraft and so forth. That is okay to do that, but not international distress frequencies. That's a violation of international law. And the Israelis were jamming our distress frequencies. They had shot up all of our transmitting antennas in the first air raids. And we had 1 whip antenna, which was not working. A young sailor by the name of Terry Halbardier took a roll of coaxial cable and ran that back to the after part of the ship to that 1 whip antenna. And the radio operators had figured out that when rockets were being fired from the aircraft, that they couldn't jam their distress frequencies because the jamming was also screwing up the flights of the rockets. So there was a brief period of a few seconds time when rockets were being fired at us when the jamming was not taking place.
Right.
And that's when the distress frequency was sent off.
Before we go any further, how many people were killed and wounded that day?
There were 34 killed. 9 were killed topside in the aircraft attacks, and 25 were killed in the research compartment by the torpedo explosion. We had a total complement of 294 personnel altogether. That included 3 civilian analysts from the linguists from the National Security Agency, us 3 Marines, and the balance were naval personnel, both intelligence personnel and those who operated the ship. There were 208 total Purple Hearts awarded out of a crew of 294.
So in your mind, is there any doubt that the mission was no survivors?
No survivors, absolutely no survivors.
Okay, Ray, there's some evidence now we know that there was actually an earlier SOS that did make it through, even though there was jamming, and there were some planes scrambled, and then what happened? So what do we know about that part of the story?
Well, we know that Terry Halbardier succeeded in joining that cable and getting the SOS out, which in turn was intercepted by the Israelis, who broke off the attack. Now, meanwhile, the commander of the 6th Task Force there in the Mediterranean had sent fighter bombers from the USS Saratoga and the USS America to do battle with whoever it was that was attacking his naval ship, the USS Liberty. We know, furthermore, that they were called back on the direct instruction of Secretary of Defense McNamara and the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. We know that from several sources. One of them is from Admiral Geiss, who was in receipt of these orders and very reluctantly ordered his fighter bombers back. He told one of the Liberty crew who managed to make it to the USS America that he was ordered not to pursue this, to turn them back, because President Johnson did not want to embarrass an ally, Israel. So that's one of the indications here. The others are either in communications intelligence. You know, the big thing here, Paul, for a intelligence officer is that there are certain species of intelligence after which analysts or journalists actually lust, okay? And those are hard evidence like intercepted communications. And when we have the Israeli pilots, as we do, saying, that's an American ship, and we have ground control saying, follow your orders, strike it, well, what further need have we for proof? So number one, what we know is that it was a deliberate attack that was meant to sink everything with no survivors. And number two, we know that it was covered up because everything done in the aftermath of that attack was done to cover it up, to include naval officers, naval lawyers who were persuaded to keep their mouths shut under orders because we did not want to embarrass an ally.
Now, when Johnson, if this report is correct and Johnson calls back the planes, it must be clear that the mission at that time is to sink the boat. If you're calling back the planes, you're allowing the attack to continue. The attack continues, leads to no survivors.
Joe Tully was skipper of the USS Saratoga. He came to our 25th reunion in Rapid City, South Dakota. And Captain Tully told me personally that the aircraft which he had initially launched had some nuclear weapons aboard them. He had assumed that the reason that they were recalled was because of those nuclear weapons. So he ordered all the nuclear weapons retrieved and rearmed with conventional warfare and relaunched. Admiral Geiss notified Washington, and Robert McNamara came back on the line, ordering them returned. Admiral Geiss said he wanted to hear that from higher authority. Lyndon Johnson himself came on and said, get those aircraft back. I will not have my allies embarrassed. Now, excuse me. The Israelis were using unmarked aircraft. We did not know who was attacking us. Excuse me, unmarked aircraft is a violation of international law. So since the Israelis were using unmarked aircraft and we did not know who was attacking us, how did Lyndon Johnson know that his allies were attacking us?
How did you know they're unmarked? You could see yourself? There's no markings on these planes?
I did not see them myself, but the other crew members did.
If you try to analyze the Israeli position, whether it starts in error or not, and from what you're saying, it seems not very plausible that it's an error, then the plan from the very beginning has to be to sink the ship, no survivors. Otherwise, the evidence, there's too many people to say what happened. What you're suggesting is that at the very least, at some fairly early on into this attack, President Johnson decides not to prevent it, not to stop it. We have one quote about not embarrassing that we don't know any more of the conversation. Ray and I talked about this interview prior to this, and we just said we're going to be very careful about trying to say what do we have evidence and what does one speculate or theorize about. So we're going to stop this in part one. We're going to do a part two. But Ray, sum up, just to end this, sum up what we know, what's evidence. In part two, we'll talk a little bit more about why we think this might have happened and go a little further into it all. But just sum up, from your point of view as someone who analyzed data for a long time, what's the evidence here quickly?
Well, it's very bizarre, Paul, because it admits of no other interpretation than a deliberate Israeli attack on a U.S. naval ship with the intent of sinking the ship and killing all crew. That's really hard to believe, but the evidence is unassailable. We know that. That's fact. That's not opinion. We also know from confessions by Navy lawyers and by all manner of other circumstances that this thing was covered up and still is covered up by the official version. So that we know, cover up and attack, deliberate attack. What we don't know, and it boggles the mind, why did the Israelis do it? And I don't know of any diplomat or U.S. official that has taken the trouble to ask them.
But a very quick summation of what the evidence certainly points to, and there seems to be pretty clear evidence. Well, first of all, there is no argument from anyone that the Israelis attacked an American ship, the USS Liberty, during the 1967 Six-Day War. In fact, the Israeli government has paid compensation, has acknowledged that they attacked the boat. But the official version, official Israeli version, the official American version, is this was all done in error. They thought it was an Egyptian boat. And even though the attack went on for 75 minutes, even though there are many eyewitness reports that the American flag was clearly visible, as Bryce said in part one, there was clearly the boat was marked. The markings on the boat clearly said it was points to the fact that it's a U.S. ship. It was a very modern spy ship. It wasn't some old Egyptian Navy ship, and so on. The evidence clearly points to the fact that the Israelis had to know what they were hitting. In part one, we also quoted John Crutzen, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, who has several quotes from survivors and also from people that were in on the intelligence gathering that day, that not only did the Israelis know what they were hitting, but that the mission was to sink the boat. The mission was no survivors. So, gentlemen, it seems if they had succeeded in that mission that there were no survivors, then they could have, I guess, anything could have been made up afterwards as to who hit that boat. If Bryce says in part one that the planes were not marked and so on, it wouldn't have been very difficult, I guess, to make up the story that this was, in fact, the Egyptian Navy that did all this. I know we're trying to be very careful about speculation and fact, but one can't not ask the question, why would the Israelis want to do this? And the Americans were fully on board with the Israelis in the Six-Day War, were they not? Why would such a false flag operation be necessary?
I've been asked that question several times. In fact, some 3 years ago, I was supposed to have a Skype interview with Israel Television. They had discussed it with me over the phone. Come the day that we're supposed to do it live on Israel Television, suddenly they said they were having technical problems. They would call back in half an hour. The half an hour was up and they never came back. I believe that there were at least three reasons why the Israelis did this. Number one, there was a tacit agreement between the Johnson administration and the Israeli government not to attack Golan Heights. I can understand the Israelis wanting to take the Golan Heights. Syria was in control of Golan Heights at the time. Syria was being supplied militarily and with advisors from the Soviet Union. For Israel to attack Golan Heights would have probably involved Soviet troops and could very well have invited Soviet intervention. So there was a tacit agreement between the Johnson administration and the Israeli government not to do so. The Israelis desperately wanted Golan Heights. That was one of their primary objectives of the 6 Days War, and I can understand that. The Syrians would trot out their artillery pieces and their mortars and pound Israeli kibbutzes, and several civilians were being killed and wounded. So the Israelis wanted the Golan Heights. The Israelis had captured an entire Egyptian brigade, and the world knew about that. Somewhere in excess of 850 Egyptian troops. They had pretty well surrendered to the Israelis. That was at El Arish on the Sinai Peninsula on the 8th of June. The Israelis needed those troops to attack Golan Heights, and they had planned on attacking the Golan Heights on the 8th of June. But here's the USS Liberty out there, 13 and a half miles off in international waters. Those troops, 850 of them or more, were ordered to dig their own graves and then brutally murdered by the Israelis.
How do we know this is true?
As a matter of fact, about 20 years ago, two Israeli reporters, one from Israeli television and a news reporter, put that out to the public that they had found the evidence that that had taken place.
Ray, do you know where the citations are, Ray? Do you know this?
Yeah. There are also a lot of the Israeli soldiers that had their consciences get to them and confess that they either participated or watched this happen. There's a historian, I think his name is, let's see, I have it here, Aryeh Yatzikai of Bar Ilan University. He's been very careful to tell Israeli radio, and as Sarge says, it was 20 years ago now that this all came out, and this is when the Israeli soldiers corroborated this. So it's very well corroborated, and Jim Bamford, in his excellent book, Body of Secrets, tells chapter and verse about this.
Okay, so we're not saying there's evidence that connects this attack to these events, but there's evidence these events took place at this time, and then people can draw their own conclusions from that. If my memory is correct, at the beginning of the Six-Day War, the Israeli Air Force took out the entire Egyptian Air Force in a matter of minutes. And this was all supposed to be because the Israelis said they had intelligence that the Egyptians were about to attack Israel. This all turned out to be false, that there was no evidence that the Egyptians planned to attack Israel. The Egyptians, from what I understand of the story, were in a defensive position. But one of the reasons it came out later that the Egyptians were not about to attack Israel, and this came out, this has been discussed in the Israeli press, and it's no big secret in the last few years that this in fact was the history. But it was partly American intelligence gathering that makes people now understand that in fact Egypt was not about to attack the United States. So that's another thing that was going on at that time. Ray, what can you add to this?
Well, just to supplement what you just said, Paul, Menachem Begin in the New York Times is quoted as saying, the Egyptians were not about to attack us. We attacked them, and we blamed it on the Egyptians. So you have the Prime Minister of Israel admitting that. Now, as far as U.S. intelligence capabilities are concerned, the U.S. could easily detect if the Israelis were going up on the Golan Heights on that fourth or fifth day of the war, because they had no capability. That is, the Israelis could not communicate without using the kind of communications that could easily be intercepted by the Liberty. And they didn't want that. And this is the explanation that Admiral Moore favors, namely, the Israelis very much favor asking not for permission, but for penance or for forgiveness, okay? So they didn't want the U.S. ambassador storming into the defense ministry saying, we know you're about to go out on the Golan Heights, don't do it. We told you 5 times, now here's 6, don't do it. They much prefer to do it anyway. The other thing is that these two are not unrelated. Al Arish was a real problem for the Israelis. They had come down in an axis of 3 columns, okay, and they collected all kinds of Egyptian forces who surrendered. Now, those people have to be watered. They have to drink water. They have to be taken care of. As Sarge says, under the conventions, international conventions, they were a real headache for the Israelis. And besides that, those troops were needed on the Golan. So these things are all kind of connected. And they're not mutually exclusive, but again, I have to say, the speculation, nobody's asked the Israelis why they did it. The fact that they did it has to remain inviolate. They did do it. They did do it deliberately, and the United States covered up for them. Why they did it, it's incredible that they did it. So it's really hard to piece together.
Well, as I say, we're saying there's certain things that were happening in the context of the moment. There are, as we understand it, there is verifiable fact that these Egyptian soldiers were killed. We certainly know now that the Israeli accusation that Egypt was about to attack Israel is not the case. The Israelis say so themselves. There's certainly been the accusation. I don't know the topic well enough as this has been verified. Perhaps you gentlemen do. There's certainly the accusation that when the Israelis took out the Egyptian Air Force, they used American intelligence to know exactly where and how to do it. I'm not sure that really was necessary because the planes are kind of all out on the runway, I think. But if the Americans are implicated in essentially a preemptive strike and the Egyptians were not about to launch war, then this all leads to, I guess, the elephant in the room here, which is what did Johnson know and when did he know it? Lyndon Johnson apparently orders back these planes that could have rescued or prevented the attack or stopped it earlier. So, we're to understand that the Israelis have a plan to sink this boat so there'll be no survivors. When Johnson calls back the planes, he must understand he's facilitating, in all likelihood, the sinking of this boat. So why would and just not to embarrass an ally seems a little bit not enough of a reason here, but so far that's what we know about it.
I'd suggest two things, Paul. One is that our intelligence was good enough to know what was going on there before the SOS went up. So it is possible that LBJ learned about this, the White House knew about the attack when it began, not when the SOS went up. The other thing is a more sinister explanation, and that is that in some sources, LBJ is quoted as saying, I don't care about a shipload of U.S. sailors if it means damaging our relations with an ally. That is incredibly cynical, but, cynicism, I've learned, is very prevalent in Washington, especially during wartime.
Well, it's also not just about, I would think, if I'm trying to, of course, let me just say again, we are all speculating, and we're trying to say this is speculation, this is hypothesizing, over here is evidence. But if you're sitting there as U.S. president at the beginning of the Six-Day War, you are very worried about how the entire Arab world is, and the whole world is going to see the U.S. role in what Israel has just done. And they just wipe out the Egyptian Air Force. They're just starting to expand the Israeli borders significantly. It's an offensive assault. It's not a defensive position, is the truth of it. But the whole storyline is it's defensive. So in that moment, if the sinking of the Liberty can be dressed up as an Egyptian attack on an American boat, that certainly helps the narrative. The narrative being, we are under attack by these Arabs, and we and the Israelis all got to band together and fight.
I would have to say that the intelligence was good enough to prevent any American official from believing that version. It just would be incredible that the Egyptians could have done this kind of thing.
I'm not suggesting they believed any of this. I'm saying it's part of a propaganda war.
Yeah. Well, it seems unlikely to me. The major concern was how the Soviet Union would react. And we know that U.S. forces were put on high alert, DEFCON 4, I believe, because of some of the threatening gestures, speeches, and military moves done by the Soviet Union at that time. So it was pretty dicey stuff. And what LBJ is concerned about is the Soviet Union coming in on the side of the Arabs. So in that sense, everything was very dicey, and he made these decisions rather quickly. And he wasn't about to put up with another irritant here where his allies, the Israelis, will be totally discredited before the world.
Bryce?
That's very plausible, but it's also the reason why the Israelis did it. That raises a very big question. The whole thing about Soviet involvement is another big question. What our language section was tasked with when we went into the Eastern Mediterranean, I was a voice section intercept supervisor, and we were not even tasked against the Israelis. I was told that if we identified any voice target as being Israeli, we were to make a notation and drop it. Our primary area of responsibility was the Soviets, which were located at Alexandria. There were 5 Soviet Tu-95 Bear aircraft there, and the Soviets had told the world that they had been given to the United Arab Republic. But the truth of the matter was, none of the Egyptians were allowed anywhere near those aircraft. They were all manned by Soviet troops wearing Egyptian army uniforms. And my task was to nail down those Soviets, locate them, and find out what they were doing via voice intercept.
The reason that Sarge was seconded to the Liberty and put on there was because he was a Russian linguist.
You're saying Sarge, you mean Bryce?
Yeah, I call him Sarge, Sergeant Lockwood Bryce. The reason he was put on there was because of his Russian language capabilities, and he was guiding the collection of those things.
So just to sum up, we don't know for certain what the Israeli intent was, but both of you have no doubt that the Israeli deliberately tried to sink the Liberty and killed these sailors with intent. Yes, this is a summation of where we're at. And number 2, you are both saying the evidence says that Lyndon Johnson, at some point, whether it's before or during the attack, makes a decision not to defend the Liberty, right?
Correct.
Now, how come in 48 years there's never been an inquiry to answer these questions?
Well, the answer is that this is a very delicate political problem. And the current relevance, Paul, I would suggest, is that the Israelis are capable of doing this kind of thing when they see their supreme national interests at stake. When I say current, I mean the negotiation that is near conclusion on the Iranian nuclear problem. I fully expect that Israeli policymakers and planners are considering some kind of provocation to prevent that treaty or that arrangement from being concluded. Now, what could they do? False flag attack? They could do what they did in 2009 and attack and kill 5 Iranian Revolutionary Guards generals and put the kibosh on a really good start back in October of 2009. There are limited things that they can do, and I'm very worried.
I want to insert here just a little bit detail on recent history. English India broke up in 1947, creating East and West Pakistan. Of course, then the East Pakistan became Bangladesh. It broke away from Pakistan, but it was on the east and west side of what's now Hindu India, basically. At any rate, the madrasas were highly supported to indoctrinate the youth in forwarding Islam in this British area that they controlled, part of the British Empire for a time there. But that breakup, before the breakup and after, was a big influx of the strict Saudi Islam and the madrasas. They're still there and indoctrinating. Some children from America even go there. There's so much money, but it is indoctrinating strict Islam, and the it worked in making a very strong stand against the Hindus. And it's still going on in that one little province there between Pakistan and India that was an ancient holy site for the Hindus. At any rate, then came the 6-Day War of Israel, and the big fear of Russian nuclear weapons that America didn't want the Israelites to invade Syria and so forth. And Israel ended up bombing the intelligence ship there. You can get that online during the 6-Day War, and they tried to destroy it because it was monitoring, and they wanted to. Israel killed all the Egyptian soldiers that they had in their secret advance, the surprise advance had taken. They killed them all because they wanted those troops to go and take part of Syria, which they did, to Golan Heights. Now you can find Trump Village there. But, at any rate, then the problem of the West against Russia, and the America with the work of Israel. Israel was the 6-Day War was in 1967, but then Afghanistan had been become communist and was being protected. The communist government was being protected by Russia. That's when this background in Pakistan and Afghanistan of all these madrasas was used to create the Taliban as a force against Russia. What broke the backbone of Russia was the women. America gave these Afghanistan Muslim fighters handheld rockets shooting down Russian planes loaded with Russian troops, and so many, and taken as slaves and so forth. It was a large part of what weakened Russia, and that Afghanistan and India broke up or the Afghan war against Russia was in 1989. And that was a large part of what led to the breakdown of Russia. And the women had politically gone against. And of course, America was using the fancy women going and showing the Russian women like they're dressed like in foreign ladies' clothes and so forth, but making the jealousy of Western Europe and America.
Pay attention, please, thank you. Is next day there. Very nice. Is next evening there. Very nice.
Having no choice is no fun. That's why at Wendy's, every hamburger isn't dressed the same. You'll get your choice of fresh toppings, fresh tomatoes, fresh lettuce, fresh onions, cheese, bacon, and more. Having a choice is better than not.
Is next swimwear.
Choose fresh. Choose Wendy's.
So that was the background there, and still today, those madrasas are there. as I said, an American students are going there. But I just wanted to insert that about, give some background to this murder cult. And the problem of the Sunni Shiite problem has been amplified because with the withdrawal of Britain and making all these Sunni kingdoms, many of the emirates there have a large Shiite population, just like there's a large Shiite population in Yemen, and they're trying to exterminate them. And America's helping, buying. They buy weapons from her. You saw Trump with this holding up. Oh, look how much he's selling to the Saudi prince. That was to murder people in Yemen. But that's just the way things are going on with these murder cults. And as I point out elsewhere, the corruption of the Saudi royalty, the true Muslims are against this corrupt, worldly upper class with all their money and worldliness. And they are against the Saudi royalty. But they've got, Saudi royalty is working together with Israel against the Islamic State and the Shiites. They're both enemies of the ruling class of Sunnis. So Israel they're both enemies of Israel too. So they're working together now. But that's way, let's go on with it now. Thank you.
But at any rate, now Iran is standing up against Israel as an honorable thing. To all these people that have been murdered and displaced by this evil murder cult, how do you destroy the destroyer? An important element here is many honorable, respectful Muslims, Salafists, are against the Saudi royalty. They're a corrupt modern society like the corruption of Christian society and modernism and advocating homosexuality and all these things. And here's a Sunni prince caught on camera beating his homosexual slave in France, and then he goes to his room in the hotel and murders him, and the prince got caught. He's in jail. But the corruption of upper class people that give their baby, the women don't want to care for their babies. They have somebody else care for them, so that they are narcissistic and the Lord, all children, boys like boys and girls like girls. If they have a strong foundation, they grow through it. When the hormones hit, they like the opposite sex. But if they don't have the foundation, they end up narcissistic. Or if the foundation, as you can see, the explosion of behavior where the children are just going, blah, 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 because they've been set in a crib deprived, put in early daycare or whatever, and no breastfeeding, and shoved with a rubber nipple instead of human interaction. But that's another thing. Don't let me get off on that. The corruption of the upper class Arab society is the enemy of responsible Muslims that want to build healthy homes. And Syria is also the enemy of the Saudi royalty, because many of the Arab Emirates are majority Shiite, and the Sunnis are dominating them and won't give them rights. And so that's a conflict there. And you probably heard the Saudi royalty had the chief religious Shiite imam beheaded. So the Saudi royalty and the Jewish are working together and paying the United States and the political system run by that AIPAC Jewish organization that both Republicans and Democrats, nobody will go against it, just like they wouldn't go against the AMA. But that's a whole other thing. All right. So there's the crux of the Iran, the conflict within Sunni Muslims, the corrupt upper class, and the imams that are still preaching honorable Islam. The upper class is their enemy, a corrupt enemy. But so you see how the Israel and the Saudi royalty work together, and America, while they're supplying the weapons to murder all those people in Yemen. That I don't want to take too long with this. The other thing I want to make clear is I have the greatest respect for Abraham as the archetype who's set aside a special people who didn't sacrifice their babies. That's what made the children of Abraham in a culture where women want to get rid of their babies. In America now, there's more infants murdered than there was in Russia in the early 90s, more abortions than live births. But that's a whole another thing. I value myself as a child of Abraham. As Jesus said, you could raise children of Abraham up from the dirt. That it's the behavior, respect for human life. And to me, Jesus is not some magic out of the clouds. Jesus is so honorable. He was a normal, natural human being, even if his mother wasn't married when she got pregnant. He lived honorably and confronted this murder cult that was indoctrinating this whole nation of people. And he stood up and said, we can go directly to our source of existence. And for that, the Sanhedrin had him murdered by the Roman authorities. And they wouldn't even let him, the Romans wanted to let Jesus go. And they said, no, give us Barabbas, a murderer.
Today is March 5th, 2021. It's the second day of working on updating this video. The video was motivated by Professor Jordan B. Peterson, a video that he released on March 1st, and I saw it on March 2nd, where he's suffering and having some pain, and part of it's spiritual. I suffered 2 years ago when I discovered that Mohammad learned the murder cult from Moses. And I was brought up with a Christian, the Bible and the Word of God, and you believe in this or you're going to burn in hell and all that. And here to study Mohammed and learn that he learned his murder cult from Moses, the magic god on the mountain, and all the evil that Moses did in murdering people. I want to share this with Jordan. I'm supposed to have been dead a month ago from the terminal liver bile duct tumor. But I'm ready to go. I'm kind of frustrated that I'm still alive, and I listen to the news, what's going on in America, and the way they refuse to look at the election manipulation and allowing the write-in votes, and you don't have to have ID, and all of the government giveaway that and then you have people that accepting all that government money. If they didn't vote for the Democrats who voted to give it to them, they'd be making a fool of themselves. But at any rate, that whole thing is, I'm frustrated that I'm not out of it. I do believe what it says, from dirt thou art, until dirt thou must return. God What do people say? I taught physics by the Harvard Project Physics, where the students learn by investigating. What's space? It's a three-dimensional thing. And what's matter? And then that gets all, as I said in some earlier parts, that gets all screwed up. My website, thewaythetruthandthelife.net, has much of the foolishness that's being taught at the university exposed. But what I want to speak here is to Jordan. I'm ready to die. I'm not worried about eternity. And as far as, is there an eternity? Yes, there's an eternity, but you're going to go back to dirt and I'm going to go back to dirt. The thing is, what gives life meaning? And you understand that. The individual sovereignty and having purpose to your life. What do? You make a garden, you have children, you take responsibility for yourself and those who you're helping, not dominating, but helping children grow up. Working together with a wife to make a healthy home. Working together with other men to make a healthy factory or whatever. Operationally, define God, Lord Jordan. God is everything. Matter, space, and motion. And don't project your human finiteness on it. Space is infinite. The fluid substance of the ether, which everything is formed out of by vortex rings and on down, that'll be exposed in eternity. But that matter is not created or destroyed. Everything we know has a beginning and end. Mother was died, father, our baby was born. We can only travel so far. Well, we've gotten all the way to the moon. Wow. And so space is infinite. Matter is infinite. The density of matter is finite, that everything's formed out of. But the motion of matter is the ability to move. Matter, the momentum and energy is not created, not destroyed. Eternal and infinite, but finite in density. Here's the thing. When the Russians put up the Sputnik, they were worried about, what if the electronics communication failed? Could we use mental telepathy? And they did a bunch of experiments. And this, I want you to know, I pray there's some communication with you, that you're not alone, that I'm not alone. Then how this works, and I believe it's ether waves. I believe that this thing that nothing travels faster than the speed of light is a concoction from not understanding the Michelson-Morley interferometer experiment. But no, that the light moves in the ether medium. But Jordan, God is everything. You're part of God. The evil murder cult priesthood said, you have to come to us and we'll go to God. Of course, the 10% in those days, they were the government, and that was the taxes for the government. Now, I wish we could get away with 10%. But at any rate, Jesus said, no, I'm part of God. I'm born of God. I'm made out of God's dirt. I can go directly to my source of existence. That's eternity, where we come from, the matter, space, and motion. And this, they said, so they killed Jesus. But that is going to who God is. But when the Russians sent up that spacecraft, they did this experiment with rabbits to investigate extrasensory perception. And the mother rabbit had monitors. You can look on the internet, it's there. It was released by the CIA in 205, although there were stories about it while I was teaching physics in the 1990s. They took the mother's litter of rabbits and put them in a submarine and sailed around the different oceans and killed their babies one at a time with no communication with the laboratory. The laboratory had the electronic monitoring of the mother's brain, and they knew exactly when they compared their notes, no communication during this, when they compared their notes on the time the babies were killed and the mother's response, the mother knew every time. Well, there's communication we don't understand. And they're probably calling it gravity waves and dark matter and all this stuff. But those things will come about. At any rate, my understanding is it's eternal. And this evolution has happened millions and millions of times through eternity. Is there other intelligent life in space? I have no doubt. Is there awareness of us? I have no problem with that. By the time they have bionic bodies, that there's no life or death, just intelligence, what would make life interesting? Watching what's going to happen. Just like these people now going to gambling, say, am I going to win or lose? What's going to happen? Gives meaning to their life. They don't, not that they're taking what they can control, they're looking into what they can't control and guessing. I believe there is observation of human life on Earth from outer space, but I don't believe they're meddling and playing tinker toys that respect our sovereignty as an evolutionary society, and they're just watching and wondering, maybe betting, will Putin manage to expose the corruption of Hillary and what her husband did there in Kosovo and all those things? No. Anyway, Jordan, I'm ready to go. I've got to listen to this news. I still pray for you. I pray for Putin. I'm not too happy with Trump. He supporting the murder cult there. At any rate, thank you for your time and attention.
This is the ending message. This is the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. These are the guest rooms in our 3 homes, New York, Florida, and Russia. They are prepared for those messengers that Jesus prayed for in Luke chapter 10. And he gave them the instructions. Reading from Luke chapter 10, verse 1. After these things the Lord appointed 70 other also, and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. As Jesus said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. Verse 2, therefore he said unto them, the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into the harvest. This is Jesus praying for more servants and asking us to do the same. Verse 3, go your ways. Behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. Verse 4, carry neither purse nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man on the way. Verse 5, and into whatsoever house ye enter, first say, peace be to this house. Verse 6, and if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall return unto you again. Verse 7, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. Verse 8, and into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you, eat such things as they set before you. Verse 9, and heal the sick that are therein, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 10, but into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you not, go your way out into the streets of the same, and say, verse 11, even the very dust of your city, which cleaves on us, we wipe off against you. Notwithstanding, be ye sure of this, that the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 12, but I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable in that day for Sodom than for that city. In closing, remember Matthew 18, verse 20, where Jesus said, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them.
As I end, I want to add 2 important points. Number 1, I definitely believe in the power of prayer, not some magic thing. The Russian rabbit experiment and the ability of people to intuitively communicate is, to me, if you looked at my physics, I explain the Michelson-Morley experiment differently, and the ether does exist, and it's probably ether waves that we can be on the same wavelength somehow with other people and communicate, good and bad. But so I believe in the power of prayer. Look at the Russian rabbit experiments. They were released by the CIA. You can find that on my website too. But or just Google Russian rabbit experiment. The other thing is, our leader should not be a man or a woman. This dominant male, manipulative female, homosexual, women's liberation, working together for anarchy has to stop. We want healthy families, and what we have to have for our leaders and our judges and our government authority and those over our home churches is a man and a woman who have shown by their examples of the children they've raised, healthy children that have healthy homes. That is a prerequisite for a position of being over the society, government, home churches, whatever. A man and a woman working together that show by their children that they can bear fruit. By their fruit you shall know them. Thank you.